reminder, choir practice, music group, whatever we're calling it, is tomorrow night at 6:30. Anyone is interested. They started the revival meetings in town, and I normally don't promote them a great deal here because just so you know where I stand on this situation, I am not always sure of who is going to be there and what is going to be said. But I do participate in it, so I will be speaking on Friday. The 12th is coming Friday. If anybody wants to see it, I will let you know. Just try to be a little bit careful about promoting stuff that you don't have a whole lot of content control over. All right. Revelation chapter 2, verses 8 through 11. It's our second church. Last week we looked at the church of Ephesus, and this week we will be looking at the church of Smyrna. So let's read our passage together. And unto the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these things saith the first and the last, which was dead and is alive. I know thy works and tribulation and poverty, that thou art rich. And I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Fear none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, and you may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. He that overcometh shall not be hurt in the second death. Let's bow for a prayer. Father, as we look again into these churches, may our ears be open to hear what the Spirit tells us. And I trust that every night that we gather together and we continue to look into your word, that we would be touched, not just by the magical and incredible things that we see in the book of Revelation, but by your grandeur and your glory and your majesty. And it would have an effect on our lives, that it would drive us to your word, that it would drive us to you, that it would change our lives. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Smyrna. Ephesus left their first love. Smyrna is the persecuted church. The word Smyrna comes from the word myrrh. It means bitter. And the interesting thing about myrrh is one of the fragrances, I guess you could say, the spices that you would use to embalm. But the thing about it is it had to be crushed before it would release its fragrance. And that's interesting because this little church here in Smyrna, we don't know a great deal about it. Its history, the early stages of its history is lost to history. It's about 35 miles from Ephesus. A lot of folks think that the church of Ephesus, started by Paul, probably started this church. It had a difficult but interesting life. It is a good friend of Rome, boasted to be a big friend of Rome. And Rome reciprocated because when it was destroyed by an earthquake, one of the Roman emperors came in and rebuilt the whole city because of how supportive they had been of Rome. And we're going to see here in a minute that's probably the reason for all the tribulation that's going on here. He starts off just like he does all the others. Unto the pastor, the angel of the church in Smyrna write, these things saith the first and the last, which dead and is alive. And if you will remember, I told you that all 7 of the churches, we're going to start with the character quality of Christ. We spent so much time and really kind of, not as deeply as we could have gone, but we dug into that image that John sees in chapter 1, because as he writes to the churches, he's going to go back and he's going to take one section of that, and every little section that he takes is very important to the church and what they are dealing with. It's interesting to me how Christ reveals himself to those folks that are suffering and really in need. He starts off here and he says the first and the last. This is, we talked about this, so we're just going to go quickly. Old Testament reference to God. So in other words, this was Jesus' claim to deity. We said before, the importance of it all is that he is before it all, he is after it all. And so when all other authorities, when all other principalities, when all other powers, when all other false gods have come and gone, there is still Jesus. There is still God. And that is really important because right now, foremost and front and center, everything about the church of Smyrna was about tribulation that they're dealing with. It's hard to look down the road and enjoy, what you know is coming when all you can do is day to day wonder if you're going to be alive at the end of the day. And that's the intensity of the persecution here. Okay? And so when he reveals himself to them, he says, listen, the person who is above all this, the person who is beyond all this, wants you to know. The other thing that he says to him here is, think of the enduring power and the enduring promises. When you are in the midst of intense persecution, the thing that probably helps the most are the promises from God's Word and knowing that he is powerful enough to accomplish it despite all the chaos that's going on here in the middle of tribulation. The other phrase that he uses for himself, not only does he call himself the first and the last, but he also says, was dead and is alive. And that is important because Jesus is bigger than death, and they're killing the people at Smyrna by the hundreds and the thousands. When you're getting fed to lions, and when you're getting dressed in animal skins and having wild dogs turned loose on you, when you are being tortured beyond, Jesus Christ says, listen, I'm bigger than all this. And the way he closes this letter ties a nice little bow around this wrapping paper that he is saying, I am not trying to diminish what you're going through. I'm not trying to make light of what you're going through. We'll see that in just a second. What he says is, I am bigger and I've got this. I became dead. I willingly surrendered. I know what you're going through. I am alive. Even death is temporary. It has been conquered by me, and it can be conquered by you as well. He endured persecution as a temporary matter, and he wants them to know the same thing. In verse 9, he starts off like he does all the other letters. I know thy works. And he ties right into it and says, in tribulation and poverty, but thou art rich, and I know the blasphemy. There are three different ways that they have tribulation going here. Now, if you will remember from last week, this is one of the churches that has no rebuke. They have no rebuke. And I believe one of the reasons that they get no rebuke is because in the middle of intense persecution, all the people that are faking are gone. All the people that are just playing games are gone. You don't line somebody up and get ready to build a fire around them and burn them to death, and somebody sit there and fake it while they're burning to death. No, I mean, you can fake it when it doesn't really cost you anything, but in Smyrna, it's costing folks something. It has a purifying effect, tribulation does. So all we see here is approval, and he launches right into it. I know thy works in tribulation. This word for tribulation is a strong word. It's thlipsis in the Greek. It means pressure, crushing pressure, unbelievable pressure. Pinching a watermelon seed until it squirts or it breaks. Just everything that you can put down on it. There are a couple of examples that are used in the Bible to describe this term. One of them is grinding grain in a grist mill. And you think about corn, and every time I hear that, I think of Samson with his eyes put out, and he's grinding for the Philistines. And you got that great big heavy stone, and he's pushing it, and that stone is just crushing the grain until it becomes flour. Now, we know that flour is good in the end, and that's the picture that persecution brings out in us. We know that in the end that it's good, but you got to think that the grain probably doesn't enjoy it at all. The other picture that we see is grapes. And you take all these grapes with their fragile skin, and if you want to make grape juice, what do you have to do? Well, you throw them in there, you take off your shoes and your socks, you jump in there, and you crush the living daylights out of them. I mean, that's what a wine press is for, right? That incredible pressure that squeezes every last little drop of juice from a grape is the picture here. And the other one is crushing myrrh for its fragrance. Well, if you want it to be really fragrant, then you just crush it to pieces. And the fragrance is released. So in the term that he uses, he knows that they are suffering under Rome. And they're suffering under Rome for a couple of reasons. They are probably hated by the citizens of Smyrna that are loyal to Rome. Emperor worship starts back with Nero, but Domitian made it a big deal. I mean, he was not a nice guy. You want to study him in history sometime. He's just not a nice guy. In fact, he was so bad that he decided that he was going to obliterate the Christians and he was going to wipe out the Bible from the face of the earth. And so the last 10 years of his reign, that's exactly what he set forth to do. And incredible time of persecution. I mean, if it was whispered that you were a Christian, he was going to find out because he'd torture you until you confessed or died. Just the way he was. Not really a nice guy. What's interesting in history, at least it was interesting to me, the Romans started becoming very big in emperor worship, which works well for their empire, right? Because if you worship a leader, then you have a hard time back-talking, rebelling, you know. But somewhere along the line, I guess because they knew that Jews would never submit to it, the Jews were the only group that were exempt from it. And so while everybody else, under the auspice of the Roman Empire, were forced into idolater worship, the Jewish people were exempted from it because it very clearly states, you know, you only have one God. So what happens is the Jews in the area kind of were an umbrella of protection for the Christians. But as Rome started increasing their pressure on Christians and started taking them and using them for sport in the Colosseums and burning them on the Appian Way and all those types of things, the Jews kind of sold out the Christians. And we're going to see a turn here a little bit later as the synagogue of Satan. Synagogue was supposed to be somewhere where God accomplished his work in his will, and actually what they were doing is if the Jews went to the Romans and said, this person isn't a Jew, then if you wanted to find out if the person was a Christian or not, all you had to do was take them to court and force them into emperor worship. And if they refused to confess whoever the emperor was as God, and they refused to offer the yearly sacrifice, then they would have been tortured and killed as a Christian. You're talking about prison, you're talking about beatings, you're talking about being fed to animals, multiple accounts of being boiled in oil. In fact, it actually became a pretty popular thing for them. The Romans loved to crucify people, and so to kind of make a statement to folks that were around them, a lot of times they would either crucify them or they would boil them in oil, and then at night they would light them on fire and use them as torches along the roads. So anybody who was traveling in the evenings, or anybody, you know, before he went to bed would notice, hey, they caught another Christian because there he is out there burning. Pretty gruesome and sick way of doing it, but it was really meant to scare the ever-loving daylights out of everybody for doing it. All manner of torture. Unbelievable at this time period what they did to folks. Really. I mean, it's... At one point I read in one of the articles about a guy who said the tormentors were so frustrated with trying to get this person to confess, they'd run out of things to do with them and couldn't believe that they were still alive. Can you imagine? Jesus is not writing to this church and saying, you know what, it's going to be okay, it's not that big a deal. That is not what he does to them. Compound all of the threat of death, compound all of the threat of physical violence, and you have this economic persecution that's going on, and we'll get there in just a minute. love this phrase. I know thy works and thy tribulation. He does not trivialize it. He doesn't make light of it. He doesn't say it's not that bad. It is not demeaning. He doesn't say, well, if you were a little bit stronger, you'd be able to bear up under this better. He doesn't cheapen it. He recognizes it and appreciates it. The one who was mistreated when he was here. The one who knows what it's like to have all his friends run away except for John. The one who knows what it's like to have one of his close friends deny that he even knows him. The one who knows what it's like to be on trial. And even though it's false witnesses, and even though he is not guilty of anything, as declared by Pilate, he still gets beaten and made fun of and tortured and eventually crucified. You think about it. You have this advocate in heaven, this high priest, who looks down at this church of Smyrna, who is dealing with unbelievably tough times. And Jesus says to him very simply, lovingly, understatedly, I know thy works. I know thy tribulation. Know what it feels like. Know what you're dealing with. He goes on. Not only are they dealing with tribulation, they are dealing with poverty. Now, when I first read that phrase, I kind of thought, I don't get it. Smyrna's a rich town. It's a rich town. It's one of the most beautiful towns in the area. And wealthy folks would come there. It's like a big vacation spot. Rome selected it for a huge, cathedral thing that they built there because it was such a big and beautiful town. When they excavated around that town, they find coins from all over the world. It's a huge trade center, has a great port, libraries, and I mean, this is a wealthy, wealthy, wealthy town. And Jesus says, I know thy works, I know thy tribulation, I know thy poverty. Why would they be in poverty? Why is this church in poverty in the midst of a wealthy town? Because these folks love Rome. And if you're not going to worship the emperor, then we're not employing you. You get blackballed. Not only that, but all the businesses that were associated here would have been boycotted. And then you add on top of that, if they haul this father out, and they haul this mother out, and they kill him, and you've got these kids here, who takes care of the kids? It's not like the citizens of Smyrna are going to care, right? Those were Christian kids. So here you have all these needy folks, I hate to say leftovers, but the consequences of this intense persecution. And there are needs after needs after needs. If you survived it, can you imagine the medical help you would have needed? You certainly can't go out and try to find a job if they've broken your arms and your legs or put out your eyes. Say, what is his response? Look at his response. I know your poverty, but thou art rich. Oh, wait a minute. Am I rich or am I poor? Well, turn to James chapter 2, verse 5. Hearken, my beloved brethren, hath not God chosen the poor of this world, rich in faith, and heirs of the kingdom which he hath promised to them that love him? God is reminding them, listen, you're going through a tough time. Maybe you can't find a job. Maybe nobody will come and support your business. Maybe you have all these needy folks that you're trying to take care of and do right by, and it just seems like life is really, really hard. But hold on for just a minute. Because while you're in the midst of this rich town and all these people are taking exotic vacations and they're sitting in their wonderful palaces and they're looking down on you and they're making fun of you and they're judging you, just whoa, hold on just a minute. Think about who really is rich. has eternity to be a joint heir of Jesus Christ. And now who's rich and who's poor? Because when they pass away, what do they take with them? What else do they get to enjoy? They have a few short years where they can sit in their beautiful city and they can look down on you Christians and have fun with you and persecute you. But after that, eternity of what? And you get to be a joint heir of Jesus Christ, bride of Christ, adorned for his wedding. You are rich. He's going to go on here. Not only does he tell them they are in tribulation, and not only does he tell them they're in poverty, but they're dealing with slander as well. And there's an interesting term here, because this term is only normally used of God. He says, I know the blasphemy of them which say they are Jews and are not, but are the synagogue of Satan. Now, this intense word blasphemy, I believe he uses it because he's referring to the wickedness and the severity and the intensity of how they are persecuting these folks. Blasphemy is usually when you say something against God that isn't true of him, or you attribute something to him that shouldn't be. This is a vile, wicked thing that they are making fun of these Christians. And what is most interesting here is you expect that from the unsaved folks, but you don't expect it from God's chosen people. Look at what he says. To them which say they are Jews and are not. Well, are they Jews or are they not? Go to Romans chapter 2. We have dealt with this before. Romans chapter 2, verse 28 and 29. For he is not a Jew, which is one outwardly, neither is that circumcision which is outward in the flesh. But he is a Jew, which is one inwardly, and circumcision is that of the heart, in the spirit, and not of the letter, whose praise is not of men, but of God. See what he's saying? He's saying you're not just a Jew because you claim to be a Jew, and because you're circumcised on the outside, you are not acting like a Jew. Why would a Jew who claims to be God's chosen people be turning on these Christians? Why would they be holding hands with Rome in persecution of anyone? I mean, where do you find that in God's law? Go to John chapter 8. It's not Matthew, it's John. John chapter 8, verses 33 through 37. This is the passage we dealt with before. He is talking to them, and he said, they answered him, we be Abraham's seed, and were never in bondage to any man. How sayest thou, ye shall be made free? Jesus answered them, verily, verily, I say unto you, whosoever committeth sin is the servant of sin. And the servant abideth not in the house forever, but the Son abideth forever. If the Son therefore shall make you free, you shall be free indeed. I know that you are Abraham's seed, but you seek to kill me, because my word hath no place in you. I speak that which I have seen with my father, and ye do that which ye have seen with your father. And they answer him back again, Abraham is our father. And Jesus is saying, don't you get it? Just because you say you're a Christian doesn't mean you act like a Christian, doesn't mean you are a Christian. And in the church of Smyrna, you have all these folks who are claiming to be a Christian, and they are being tried in the fires, literally. And God says, I know these folks claim to be Jews, but they're not really. They don't think like it. They don't act like it. They don't worship like it. He has another phrase which just breaks your heart in Revelation 2. He's the synagogue of Satan. It's interesting that this phrase is only used twice that I know of in the Bible. It's going to be used a little bit later here in Revelation. It just doesn't sound right. It's one of those things that when it strikes your ear, it sounds really weird. I mean, why would you say synagogue of Satan? Well, A Jew could claim to be a Christian, and if he's not Jewish, then he is punishable by all the laws for refusing to worship idols. And what I find most interesting about this term is, when you think of synagogue in the Bible, think Sunday school. Okay? They went to the temple, which was church, and that's where they had worship services, but that's where they did their sacrifices and those types of things. When they studied the law, they did that in the synagogue. And synagogue could be located in all kinds of places. Now, it could happen at the temple, but there was only one temple, and that was in Jerusalem. If you live in Germany, how do you get to Jerusalem to worship in the temple? And so there were very detailed rules as when there were a certain number of Jewish men in an area, they were allowed to organize a synagogue. And in the synagogue is where the folks would gather and they would read the law and they would discuss about it. That's what a synagogue was for. So it's a whole lot like our Sunday school. Okay? It's where a little bit more informal setting than is at the temple. Only certain folks were allowed so far in the temple, and then only priests. Okay? You could come into a synagogue and you could sit and listen and learn and read and study the law. And you could hear great teachers come in and talk about the different parts of the law. It's one of the reasons why Jesus was constantly going in there, and they'd ask him to open something and they'd say, wow, he spoke with such authority. Yeah, he's talking about himself. Of course he was speaking with such authority. So this term, when you think about that, and you think about the fact that this is supposed to be somewhere where God's word reigns supreme, and yet it says the synagogue of whom? Now, I don't know about you, but what a biting indictment. That under the name of being godly, under the name of being God's chosen people, they are sitting around in a place where they are supposed to be worshiping Him and studying His Word, and instead they are doing that which benefits Satan. They're selling out the Christians to the Romans for persecution. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. But we see it all the time in our country too. I just saw not that long ago another post where a whole bunch of folks got together outside an abortion clinic. Pastors and everybody holding hands and praying and asking God to bless it. Seriously? I mean, whosoever taketh innocent blood should have what? Should have his life forfeited. I don't know how you ask God to bless something like that, but there we are. Not doing what we're supposed to do. What's his advice to them in verse 10? For none of those things which thou shalt fear, none of those things which thou shalt suffer. Behold, the devil shall cast some of you into prison, that ye may be tried, and ye shall have tribulation 10 days. Be thou faithful unto death, and I will give thee a crown of life. Do not fear what is coming. Now, I don't know about you. But if I'm reading a letter to the church of Pergamos, and I start reading and it says, tell the pastor, I know thy works and thy tribulation, and thy poverty, and thy slander. I'd be comforted by that. I'm glad he knows. I'm glad he understands. I'm glad he cares. But I wouldn't get real excited if they said, you know what? Don't fear how bad it's about to get. Because I'd be sitting there in the church at Smyrna thinking, I didn't know it could get worse. I mean, how in the world is it supposed to get worse than it is already? That's exactly what he says. Some of you are going to be tried and tested in prison. Turn with me to 2 Corinthians chapter 12. 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 and 10. Going through one of those times, he's just having a tough time. He has a thorn in the flesh, and he has besought the Lord 3 times that it would depart from him, and this is God's answer to him. He said unto me, my grace is sufficient for thee, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Most gladly pleasure in infirmities, and reproaches, and necessities, and persecutions, and distresses for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then am I strong. Satan is going to test you. Just remember that God's hand is on the thermostat. And when you boil gold, it just makes it finer and finer and finer. It gets rid of the dross. It gets rid of the dross. He says, do not fear what is about to come. I know you haven't been having an easy time of it. I know you're probably tired and wondering when in the world this is going to end. But listen, my grace is sufficient. It's sufficient for today. It's sufficient for tomorrow. And if it gets a whole lot worse than that the day after, my grace is going to be sufficient then too. He goes on with this part, tribulation 10 days. To be honest with you, you can probably pick up 10 different commentaries and that, they'll say 10 different things. And I think it's because folks get all bent out of shape with all the symbolism that's happening in the book here. But rule of thumb, the simplest is usually the best interpretation. So I'm just going to run through a couple of them. Some say that it's the 10 rulers from Nero to Diocletian, and he's talking about days being a period of time. One of the commentaries I looked at even went so far as to go through and say, well, under this ruler, this is the persecution that happened, and then this guy did this and this and this and this, and this guy did this and this and this, until you get down to Diocletian, who was, all the previous 9 wrapped into one. He really was. He was a nasty guy. Unbelievable. Some of the stuff he did. Some say it's the 10 years, and it's the last 10 years of Diocletian when he wanted to wipe out Christians from the earth and burn every Bible that he could find and try and remove the Word of God. And it didn't work. The church actually exploded under those 10 years of persecution. And some people say it was probably 10 days of intense persecution. Listen, I looked up the Greek word. The Greek word usually refers to a 24-hour period of time. I'm not a Greek theologian, so I just take it at face value. I believe Jesus is warning him and saying, listen, it's been pretty bad, but they're getting ready to do a purge in this city, and for 10 days it's going to be absolutely horrible. And a lot of you aren't going to make it, speaking from this world. But if you are willing to endure, be thou faithful in death, and I will give thee a crown of life. Death for many. What he is asking them for is faithful to the end. And he says, will you remember what is coming? Don't fear the 10 days or the age or whatever he's trying to say here. Don't get so caught up in the persecution itself that you take the eyes off of the prize. And Paul constantly, in writing to the different churches, emphasized that same thing. Run that you may obtain. Don't get bent out of shape over this person over here or what's going on over here or this or that. Keep your eyes on Jesus Christ. Remember the figure that I just wrote about in chapter 1? Keep that figure ever before your eyes. It's not about Diocletian. It's not about Nero. It's not about the governor in Smyrna. It's not about the Jewish person down the road in the synagogue who sold you out. It's not about your neighbor slandering you and false accusations. It's not about what you have or what you don't have. It's about Jesus Christ. And I will give you a crown of life. Now, worst thing they can do to you? Kill you. They cannot change your eternal destiny, and they cannot affect your eternal reward. Jesus Christ says, they can boil you in oil, they can do all these different things, but I'm going to tell you that when they're done doing the worst that they can possibly do, then I'm going to step in. Because I'm the first and the last. I was dead, and now I'm alive. And because I've conquered all of that, I'm going to give you a crown of life. And when their stuff is passed away, mine's going to last forever. That's what he's saying to them. You cannot get so caught up in the temporary. What about the urging? He closes in verse 11 with this urging. He that hath an ear, let him hear what the Spirit saith unto the churches. We're going to see that in all 7 letters. It is a reminder of the importance of the Word of God and the illumination of it by the Holy Spirit. Listen, every single one of these letters is as applicable to us today as it was to the church that it was written to. Absolutely every single one of them. And so as he closes the letter, he says, I'm begging of you, allow the Holy Spirit to work in your heart. And learn something from this church. Learn something. What's he going to say to them? He that overcometh shall not be hurt of the second death. Little word "not" here is the most emphatic Greek word possible. Like, you know when you capitalize something, you're texting somebody and you're writing something and you capitalize it. I had a friend did that one time and somebody sent back and said, "Why are you yelling at me?" That's what he's doing right here. We don't see it because it's on our page, but if I texted this to you, that's what I do. I would capitalize "not." And you'd be like, "Why are you yelling at me?" So you get the point. They are threatening that they're going to take away your money. They're threatening that they can take away your family. They're threatening that they can take away your reputation. They're threatening that they can even take away your life. But can I tell you something? They cannot do this. Remember when he is exhorting them and he says, "Why do you fear this and this? Why don't you fear the one that can cast you into hell?" That's exactly what he's saying right here. Don't fear the people that can feed you to the lions. Don't fear the people that will say bad things about you. Don't fear the people that can bankrupt you or whatever. Why don't you learn to fear the one that has the power over life and death, heaven and hell? And I'm here to tell you, you will never face the great white throne judgment that is late in this book. You will not have to endure all of the tribulation that I am about to turn loose on these folks later in this book. You will not have to face the second death. Remember how we closed the image of him in chapter 1? And it says, he who holds the keys to what? Yeah. I told you all this stuff was important through the rest of the book. Now he is writing to the church of Smyrna and he's saying, they cannot. Jingle, jingle, jingle. They don't have the power. They don't have the authority. So while they can do all kinds of things to you in the flesh, eventually they kill you, and then they have no authority. They have no power. Their opinion does not matter. And I am the first and the last. I was dead, and I already conquered that. And having conquered it, guess what? You get to conquer it too. And when their beautiful city is gone, it's still around today. It's some Greek city, Ismar or something like that. I've never heard of it. Never heard of it. I started to look it up this afternoon to see if you know what, some insignificant little city. They thought they were a lot back in this day. They were big friends with Rome, and their beautiful little vacation city that was so wealthy is, you ever heard of it? Ismar? Never heard of it. It hasn't even stood the test of human time. Because he who holds the keys says, no. The limit of your power and the limit of your authority is right here. So please don't get bent out of shape, Church of Smyrna. I know your tribulation. And I know your poverty. blessings in heavenly high places. So folks, I can't promise you that it's not going to be Smyrna time in America sometime. I'm afraid that it's coming a lot quicker than any of us think. But don't get caught up on the stuff you lost down here. Lay up for yourself treasure in heaven, where moth and rust cannot corrupt, and thieves can't break in and steal. Let's go. Father, thank you for the truth from your word. Because as human beings, it is so easy to get so caught up in the things that are around us. It's everything we know. It's everything we've ever known. All the things that we're told are valuable and important down here. And all of them are in such contrast to the things that you tell us in your word are truly valuable. They're poor to the world, but they were rich in you. I want to be rich in you. I want to be a joint heir with Jesus Christ.